The year was 1892, and I was just a lad of 12, name of Thomas, living in a small, damp cottage nestled on the outskirts of Blackwood, a village so secluded it felt as though the very maps had forgotten it. My days were filled with the simple rhythm of rural life, helping my father mend fishing nets by the sluggish river, tending to our small patch of potatoes, and delivering eggs for my mother to the few scattered farmhouses that dotted the surrounding moorland. It was a quiet life, punctuated only by the distant bleating of sheep and the mournful cry of curlews. Yet, even in this peaceful isolation, a shadow had begun to fall, cast by the arrival of Reverend Mallory. He arrived on a grim, rain-swept autumn evening, his carriage a dark, polished coach pulled by two enormous, black horses that seemed to chew at the very silence of the village. He was not like our previous vicar, old Father Michael, who smelled of pipe smoke and damp earth and spoke with a comforting burr. Reverend Mallory was a gaunt man, his face a pale, sharp-boned mask beneath a shock of dark, slicked-back hair. His eyes, though, were what held you, an unnerving shade of icy blue that seemed to pierce right through you, leaving you feeling cold and exposed. He moved with a stiff, almost unnatural precision, and his voice, when he finally spoke during his first sermon, was a low, resonant baritone that filled our small, drafty church like a heavy fog. It carried an authority that made the sparse congregation shift uncomfortably in their pews. He came, he said, to bring order and enlightenment to our humble parish, to cleanse us of our provincial follies and guide us towards a more rigorous path of spiritual discipline. Our simple, well-worn hymn books were replaced with stern, leather-bound tomes. His sermons, once brief and comforting, became lengthy, intricate dissertations on sin and redemption, delivered with an intensity that made the older women clutch their shawls tighter and the children squirm. He preached of diligence, of accountability, of every soul being weighed and measured. And always, always, he spoke of a ledger. For every deed, every thought, every whispered word, he would intone, his voice echoing in the hushed church, there is an entry. A record. A ledger, held in the hand of the divine. And it is this ledger that shall determine your fate. At first, we thought it was merely a metaphor, a vivid image to underscore his teachings. But then, strange things began to happen. Small, almost imperceptible shifts in the village. Mrs. Gable, who had always been known for her quick wit and lively storytelling, grew quiet, her eyes losing their sparkle. Old man Hemlock, who possessed an uncanny knack for predicting the weather, suddenly seemed unsure of the simplest forecasts, his once sharp mind clouded. The changes were subtle, yet undeniably there, like a faint stain spreading across a once pristine cloth. Reverend Mallory began to hold private sessions, spiritual consultations, he called them, in the rectory, a grim, stone house next to the church that had always seemed a little too dark, even in the brightest sunshine. Villagers would enter, looking weary or troubled, and emerge hours later with a strange, blank calm on their faces. They would be quieter, more withdrawn, their unique quirks and passions seemingly smoothed away, leaving behind a sort of placid uniformity. And always, after these sessions, Reverend Mallory would retire to his study, a room I had only glimpsed from the outside, its windows perpetually shuttered or draped with heavy, dark curtains. From within, we would sometimes hear the faint, rhythmic scratching of a quill on parchment. My best friend, Ilora, who was a year older than me and possessed a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue, was the first to voice the growing unease. "He's changing them, Thomas," she whispered to me one afternoon, as we watched old man Hemlock stumble past, his shoulders slumped. "It's like he's taken something from them." I shivered, the words echoing my own unarticulated fears. What could it be, Illyra? She shook her head, her brow furrowed. I don't know. But he always talks about that ledger. What if it's not just a metaphor? What if he's actually writing things down? Recording something from them? The idea was outlandish, terrifying, yet it resonated with a chilling logic. The more people who underwent Reverend Mallory's consultations, the more widespread the subtle changes became. The village, once vibrant with individual personalities, was slowly becoming a collection of muted echoes, like faded photographs. The laughter was softer, the arguments less passionate, the dreams less vivid. It was as if a thin layer of gray dust had settled over Blackwood, dulling its colors. My parents, though devout, were also pragmatic. My father grumbled about the length of the sermons. My mother, with her kind, watchful eyes, worried about the increasing quietness of our neighbors. But they attributed it to the Reverend's stern influence, to his insistence on stricter piety. They did not see the subtle loss, the extinguishing of light that Illyra and I observed with growing dread. Our own family was spared, for a time. My parents had not yet undergone a private consultation, their lives too busy with the endless demands of fishing and farming. But the thought, like a persistent fly, buzzed at the back of my mind. What if it was our turn next? What would he take from my father, from his steady resolve and his quiet humor? What would he take from my mother, from her gentle strength and her infectious laugh? The thought filled me with a cold, desperate resolve. We had to find out what was happening. We had to understand this ledger. The rectory became the focal point of our desperate curiosity. It stood, silent and imposing, an alien presence in our familiar village. We learned its rhythms. Reverend Mallory kept strange hours, often working late into the night, the only light visible from his study, a single, unwavering yellow glow behind the drawn curtains. He's writing in it then, Illyra whispered, her eyes fixed on the rectory window one moonless night. His ledger. The sinister one. Our plan, born of youthful recklessness and a burgeoning sense of responsibility, began to form. We had to get into that study. We had to find that ledger. It was a foolish, dangerous thought, far grander than any adventure story I had ever read. But the fate of our village, the very essence of its people, seemed to depend on it. We watched for weeks, noting the patterns of the Reverend's infrequent departures, the times when he would visit a sick parishioner on the far side of the moor, leaving the rectory unattended for a few precious hours. One blustery evening, as the wind howled down from the hills and rattled the windows of the cottages, Reverend Mallory departed for a remote farm, his dark figure disappearing into the swirling mist. This was our chance. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum beat against the silence of the night. Illyra and I, wrapped in dark cloaks, slipped through the village, moving like shadows, the chilling wind a constant companion. The rectory loomed before us, darker and more imposing than ever, its stone walls seeming to absorb the faint moonlight. The air around it felt heavy, charged with an unseen presence. This was it. The search for the sinister ledger. The truth, or perhaps, something far more terrible than we could ever imagine. The blustery wind was both a blessing and a curse as Illyra and I approached the rectory. It whipped around us, tugging at our cloaks and stinging our cheeks, but its howls also masked the sound of our footsteps, making it easier to slip unnoticed through the village. The rectory, even in the dim moonlight, looked formidable, its grey stone walls seeming to absorb all light and warmth. A single, unwavering yellow glow emanated from Reverend Mallory's study window, a beacon of our terrifying quest. My heart throbbed like a drum against my ribs, each beat echoing the frantic pulse of adrenaline. "Are you sure you saw him go, Thomas?" Ilora whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind's lament. Her face, usually so bold, was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "He went to the McLeod's farm," I affirmed, my own voice trembling slightly. "It's a good hour's ride, even for his carriage. We have time." The McLeods lived on the furthest edge of the moor, and their eldest boy, Hamish, had fallen ill. Reverend Mallory, for all his chilling demeanor, still performed his pastoral duties with a grim efficiency. We crept around to the back of the rectory, where the shadows were deepest and where we hoped to find a less secure entry point. The garden was overgrown, a wild tangle of thorny bushes and dying plants, quite unlike the meticulous rows of vegetables in our own humble plot. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of something sickly sweet, like decaying flowers and old parchment, hung heavy in the air, different from the damp earth smell of our village. Ilora, ever the more daring of us, pointed to a small, unlatched window on the ground floor, half hidden by a thick ivy vine. "There. The kitchen window. Father Michael always kept it ajar for fresh air." My breath caught in my throat. It was too easy. Suspiciously easy. But the urgency of our mission, the thought of Mrs. Gable's faded eyes and old man Hemlock's clouded mind, pushed aside my caution. We needed to get inside. I boosted Ilora up, her small, agile form disappearing through the narrow opening with surprising ease. A moment later, I heard the faint thud of her landing inside. "All clear," she whispered, her voice muffled. Then, the distinct click of a latch. She had unbarred the back door, just as we had hoped. Slipping inside the rectory was like stepping into another world. The air was thick and stale, heavy with the same sickly sweet scent I had noticed outside, now more potent, almost cloying. It was cold, unnaturally so, even colder than the blustery night outside. Every sound we made, every rustle of our cloaks, seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. The rectory's interior was sparse and austere, far removed from the cozy warmth of our cottage. Dark, heavy furniture cast looming shadows, and the walls were adorned with severe, unsmiling portraits of previous vicars, their eyes seeming to follow our every move. "Which way to the study?" I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. Ilora pointed towards a narrow, dark corridor that led off the main hall. "I saw him go that way, always." We moved slowly, cautiously, our bare feet making no sound on the worn flagstone floor. The air grew colder as we approached the corridor, and the sickly sweet smell intensified, almost overwhelming. It was a smell that prickled the back of my throat, making my stomach churn. It was here, at the end of the corridor, that we saw it, a heavy, oak door, unlike any other in the rectory, adorned with dark iron work. The same faint yellow light we had seen from outside seeped from beneath it. This was Reverend Mallory's study. This was where the ledger lay. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. It was cold, strangely cold, as if it had absorbed all the warmth from the room. I turned it slowly, the old mechanism groaning softly in the silence. The door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in that dim, unsettling yellow light. The study was not what I expected. It wasn't merely a place of books and papers. It was a place of obsessive order and a chilling atmosphere. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, packed not with the usual theological texts, but with rows upon rows of identical, dark-bound ledgers. They were arranged meticulously, by size, then by color, then by some unseen classification. The sheer number of them was staggering. It was a library dedicated to a single, terrifying purpose. In the center of the room stood a massive, dark wooden desk, its surface gleaming faintly in the lamplight. On it lay a single, open ledger, its pages filled with neat, precise script. Beside it, a quill lay dipped in a pot of dark ink, as if Reverend Mallory had just stepped away. The air in the study was even colder than the corridor, and the sickly sweet smell was now mixed with something else, a faint, metallic tang, like old blood. But it was what was not on the desk that caught my breath. No personal effects. No trinkets. No photographs. Nothing that spoke of a human life, only the tools of his chilling trade. Ellery gasped, her eyes fixed on the open ledger. There it is, Thomas. The sinister ledger. We approached the desk, our footsteps seeming to echo unnaturally loudly on the wooden floor. The open ledger lay before us, its pages thick and yellowed with age. The script was indeed neat, almost artistic in its precision, but its content sent a cold dread through me. Each page was divided into columns, a date, a name, and then, a series of strange symbols, almost like a secret code, followed by a brief, disturbing description. I leaned closer, my heart hammering. The first entry on the open page read, August 14, 1892. Abigail Gable. Lost, wit. Gain, serenity. Then followed a series of those strange symbols. My mind reeled. Abigail Gable, whose lively storytelling had faded. Lost, wit. It was exactly what Ellery and I had observed. Below it, August 20, 1892. Jeremiah Hemlock. Lost, foresight. Gain, compliance. Old man Hemlock, who could no longer predict the weather. Lost, foresight. The words were chilling in their directness, their almost clinical detachment. Reverend Mallory wasn't just observing these changes, he was orchestrating them, recording them, as if they were commodities exchanged. This was not a spiritual ledger of good deeds and bad, it was a horrifying inventory of human attributes, stolen and categorized. As I scanned more entries, a terrible pattern emerged. Every lost entry corresponded to a unique, defining characteristic of the person: creativity, ambition, joy, empathy, courage. And every gain entry was a variation of placidity, obedience, tranquility, or conformity. He was systematically stripping the villagers of their individuality, their vibrancy, replacing it with a quiet, malleable emptiness. My gaze fell upon a particular entry, a name I recognized, someone who lived just a few cottages away, September 1, 1892. Eleanor Finch. Lost, musicality. Gain, quietude. Eleanor Finch, a young woman known for her beautiful singing voice, had recently grown silent, her melodies replaced by a haunting stillness. A wave of nausea washed over me. Suddenly, a faint click echoed from the direction of the front door. Both Ellery and I froze, our heads snapping towards the sound. Reverend Mallory. He was back. Far sooner than we had anticipated. The wind howled outside, a mournful accompaniment to the terrifying realization. We were trapped. The open ledger, a damning testament to his dark work, lay exposed on the desk. Our search for the truth had led us to the very heart of the sinister, and now, we faced the terrifying consequences of our discovery. The faint click of the front door latch was a sound that froze the very blood in my veins. It was the sound of our impending doom. Reverend Mallory was back, and we, two small children, were trapped in his sinister sanctum, with his damning ledger lying open on the desk. My gaze darted to Illyra, her face a mask of pure terror, mirroring my own. The cold, sterile air of the study seemed to press in on us, suffocating in its silence, broken only by the incessant howling of the wind outside. "Hide!" I mouthed, my voice a desperate, silent plea. There was nowhere to go. The room was sparse, dominated by the desk and the towering shelves of ledgers. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. Illyra, quicker wit than I in moments of crisis, pointed a trembling finger towards a large, heavy curtain draped over what I assumed was a window, near a shadowed corner of the room. It was our only chance. We scrambled, moving with the frantic, clumsy speed of cornered animals. We squeezed behind the thick velvet, pulling it shut just as we heard the heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching the study door. Our hearts hammered against our ribs, a deafening rhythm in the confined space. The sickly sweet smell was overpowering here, mingled with the musty scent of ancient fabric and a new, unsettling aroma that seemed to emanate directly from the approaching presence. The study door creaked open. We heard the soft thud of a heavy boot on the wooden floor, then another, measured step. Reverend Mallory was in the room. I squeezed my eyes shut, my breath held captive in my lungs, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. Illyra's hand found mine, her grip bone-crushingly tight, a silent testament to our shared terror. We could hear him moving, a soft rustle of cloth, the faint creak of the floorboards as he walked towards the desk. The yellow light, which had seemed dim before, now felt like a spotlight piercing the curtain, exposing us. I imagined him, gaunt and sharp-eyed, his pale face illuminated by the lamplight, his icy blue gaze sweeping over the room, surely noticing the open ledger, the disturbed quill. Then, a new sound. A low, guttural sigh, almost like a moan of satisfaction. Followed by the rhythmic scratching of a quill on parchment. He was writing. He had resumed his work, oblivious, or perhaps uncaring, of our presence. The sheer audacity of it, the chilling calm with which he continued his horrifying inventory, sent a fresh wave of dread through me. He was so utterly absorbed in his dark craft that he didn't even notice the faint sounds of our desperate entry, or perhaps, he simply didn't care. Time stretched, an agonizing eternity. Every scratch of the quill, every shift in his chair, was magnified, a terrifying prelude to discovery. I dared to open my eyes a fraction, peering through a tiny gap in the curtain. I could see the edge of the heavy desk, the gleam of the lamplight on its polished surface. I saw the shadow of his hand, long and skeletal, moving methodically across the open ledger. He continued to write for what felt like hours, though it was likely only minutes. The tension in our cramped hiding spot was almost unbearable. My legs ached, my throat was dry, and the strange, cloying smell was making my head spin. I wondered if he had noticed the disturbed window, the unlatched back door. But he showed no sign. He was utterly, terrifyingly focused on his task. Eventually, the scratching stopped. There was a faint sigh again, and then the quiet rustle of pages being turned. He was closing the ledger. A small, desperate hope flickered within me. Perhaps he would leave. Perhaps he would retire for the night, and we could slip away. But then, he began to speak. His voice was low, a resonant baritone, but not speaking to us. He was speaking to himself, or perhaps, to the ledger itself, as if it were a living entity. His words were not the pious pronouncements from his sermons, they were chilling, almost triumphant whispers. "Another spark contained," he murmured, the words cutting through the silence like shards of ice. The foolishness of ambition, transmuted into quiet obedience. A fine entry, indeed. He paused, then chuckled, a dry, rasping sound devoid of humor. They cling so desperately to their vibrancy, their individuality. Such a waste of energy. Far better to be guided. To be ordered. My blood ran cold. He was confirming our worst fears. He was indeed stealing aspects of their very being, their unique qualities, and replacing them with a passive, compliant emptiness. The ledger was not just a record, it was a chronicle of his systematic dehumanization, a testament to his perverse vision of a purified flock. And soon, he continued, his voice dropping to an even lower, more conspiratorial tone, the collection will be complete. The blackwood tapestry, rewoven with threads of placid devotion. Then, the true work can begin. The channeling of these accumulated energies. To power, to sustain. His voice trailed off, a hint of dark reverence in his tone. To sustain what? The question screamed in my mind, but I dared not breathe. There was a series of soft clicks, the sound of locks turning. He was securing the ledger. Then, the scrape of a chair on the wooden floor. He was standing. My heart leaped into my throat. This was it. He was either leaving, or he was about to discover us. We heard his footsteps, moving away from the desk, towards the door. My muscles were screaming, begging to run, but I forced myself to remain utterly still. The air around us seemed to vibrate with his presence, a chilling cold radiating from him. The door creaked open, and then, mercifully, closed with a soft thud. Silence. An absolute, profound silence settled over the study, broken only by the distant howls of the wind. We waited, motionless, for what felt like an eternity, listening for any sign of his return. But there was nothing. Only the echo of his chilling words, reverberating in the oppressive quiet. Slowly, cautiously, Illyra released my hand. Her fingers were clammy, but her grip had loosened. We remained behind the curtain for several more minutes, just to be sure, our bodies trembling with residual fear. When we finally dared to emerge, the study was as we had left it, the desk, the towering shelves of ledgers, the single lamp still casting its yellow glow. But the open ledger was now closed, its secrets once again hidden within its dark covers. Our escape from the rectory was quicker, driven by a desperate need to be free of its oppressive atmosphere. We slipped out the back door, closing it softly behind us, and ran, not stopping until the dim lights of our own cottages came into view. The cold night air felt invigorating, a cleansing balm after the stifling terror of the study. We had found the ledger. We had uncovered the chilling truth of Reverend Mallory's work. He wasn't just a stern vicar, he was a harvester of souls, systematically stripping the villagers of their unique qualities. The spiritual consultations were not for guidance, but for extraction. And he was accumulating these stolen essences for some dark, unspeakable purpose, to sustain something beyond our comprehension. The magnitude of his depravity was staggering. We now knew his secret, but what could we do with such a terrifying truth? How could two children expose a man who was systematically draining the very life from our village, without anyone else even noticing? The weight of the sinister ledger, and the knowledge it contained, settled heavily upon our young shoulders, a burden we knew we could not ignore. The cold, clean air outside the rectory was a shock to my lungs, a sharp, invigorating contrast to the cloying, sickly sweet atmosphere of Mallory's study. Illyra and I ran, our breath ragged, our legs burning, not stopping until the dim, welcoming glow of our own cottages was visible through the winding lanes. We didn't speak, the shared terror too raw, too recent. The weight of what we had seen, what we had understood, settled over us like a suffocating blanket. We had peeked behind the curtain of ordinary life and found something truly monstrous. When we finally stumbled into our separate homes, the normalcy of my mother preparing a late supper, the familiar scent of fish stew, felt surreal, almost alien. How could life simply continue, oblivious to the horror we had just witnessed? I mumbled a quick excuse about playing too long with Marcel, a convenient lie, as he was miles away, unaware of our escapade, and retreated to my bed. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful, filled with images of skeletal hands, endless rows of dark ledgers, and the chilling whisper of another spark contained. The days that followed were a torment. Every face in Blackwood seemed to hold a new meaning for me. I saw Mrs. Gable's quietude, Old Man Hemlock's vacant stare, Eleanor Finch's silenced melodies, and a terrible fear gripped me. My own parents, still untouched by the private consultations, felt like precious, fragile things I had to protect. The urgency to act, to do something, gnawed at me, a constant, gnawing ache behind my eyes. Elora felt it too. We met in secret, under the ancient oak tree by the river, its branches a twisted canopy against the gray sky. "What can we do, Thomas?" she whispered, her voice tinged with a desperation I had never heard from her before. "He's changing them, little by little. Soon, there'll be nothing left of our village but empty shells." I explained my desperate thought, born from the depths of my fear and the glimmer of a desperate hope, the ledger, Elora. We know what it contains. If we can show it to someone outside Blackwood, someone who isn't already under his influence. Or perhaps, if we can find a way to reverse what he's doing. The latter idea was a faint, almost impossible dream. But the former, the idea of exposing him, felt marginally more attainable. But who? Who in the world would believe two children about a man systematically harvesting souls? Even if we found a sympathetic ear, what then? Reverend Mallory was a respected figure, cloaked in the authority of his cloth. Our words against his would be nothing. We need proof, Elora concluded, her brow furrowed in deep thought. Something undeniable. The ledger itself. The thought of returning to that rectory, of facing the cold dread of Mallory's presence again, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. But her words were true. We needed the physical evidence. We needed the ledger, or at least a significant part of it. The task seemed impossible. Reverend Mallory, we knew, never left the rectory unlocked when he was gone, and he was rarely gone for long. His only long absences were when he visited the sick in remote farms, and even then, he was unpredictable. We spent the next few weeks observing, not just the rectory, but Reverend Mallory himself. We noticed his habits. He would walk through the village sometimes, a dark, solitary figure, his gaze sweeping over the villagers with an unsettling intensity. He seemed to be assessing them, measuring them, perhaps choosing his next consultation. His presence was a chilling reminder of the slow poison seeping into the heart of Blackwood. One crisp morning, a rumor began to circulate. Reverend Mallory was to attend a gathering of regional vicars in the nearest market town, a journey that would keep him away from Blackwood for an entire day and night. It was an unprecedented absence. My heart leaped, a mixture of terror and exhilaration. This was our chance. Our only chance. The night before his departure, Elora and I met under the old oak again, planning our strategy with grim determination. "We'll go in the morning, right after he leaves," I said, my voice hushed. The kitchen window again. It's the only way we know. We need to be quick, Ilora stressed, her eyes shining with fierce resolve. Just in and out. Find the ledger he uses most often. The one with the most recent entries. We gathered what we thought we would need, a sturdy sack to carry the ledger, a piece of old cloth to wipe away any footprints or disturbances, and a small, flickering candle, more for comfort than light. The hours until morning stretched like an eternity, each tick of the old grandfather clock in our cottage echoing the frantic beat of my heart. The next day dawned gray and still, the kind of morning that seemed to hold its breath. We watched, hidden behind the sparse hedgerows, as Reverend Mallory's dark carriage pulled away from the rectory, disappearing down the winding path towards the distant town. The moment it was out of sight, a cold resolve settled over me. There was no turning back now. We approached the rectory with more urgency this time, less trepidation. The memory of our last visit, the fear, still lingered, but it was overshadowed by the desperate need to act. The kitchen window was still unlatched, a silent invitation into the heart of the darkness. We slipped inside, the familiar stale, sickly sweet smell immediately assaulting our senses. The rectory was silent, eerily so. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows, seemed amplified. We moved swiftly towards the study, our hearts pounding. The heavy oak door of the study stood before us, a grim gateway to the truth. I pushed it open. The study was just as we remembered it, the towering shelves of ledgers, the imposing desk. The single lamp, however, was out, plunging the room into a heavy gloom, broken only by the faint light filtering through the heavy curtains. The air was colder here, thicker with the strange, metallic tang. We moved directly to the desk. Which one? Ilora whispered, her gaze sweeping over the stack of closed ledgers. The one he was writing in, I replied, my voice hushed. It looked newer, less worn than the others. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the smooth, dark leather of a particular volume. It felt colder than the others, and a faint, almost imperceptible hum seemed to emanate from it, the same low thrum we had heard the last time, but far, far fainter. This was it. The Sinister ledger. I lifted it, and its weight was surprisingly heavy, as if it contained not just paper, but the very essence of the lives recorded within. Its cover was unadorned, save for a single, deeply embossed symbol, a stylized, spiraling vortex. The same symbol I had seen hinted at in old Alphonse Dubois' book, representing the confluence of energies. This was not just a record, it was a connection, a link to the very power Reverend Mallory wielded. As I held it, a strange sensation washed over me. A fleeting glimpse, as if a memory not my own, of vibrant laughter, of passionate debate, of soaring melodies. Then, just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by a dull, aching emptiness. It was the echo of the lost attributes, the fragments of souls contained within its pages. The book itself felt alive, humming with a quiet, insidious power. Got it, I breathed, my voice filled with a mixture of terror and triumph. We quickly wrapped it in the sack, muffling its faint hum. But as we turned to leave, a shadow detached itself from the darkest corner of the room. It was not the hulking monstrosity I had encountered in the Hotel of Shadows, but something smaller, more amorphous, yet equally terrifying. A swirling mass of darkness, vaguely humanoid, but without discernible features, coalescing from the gloom. It pulsed with a cold, malevolent energy, and from its depths, a low, guttural growl, thin but sharp, echoed in the silence of the study. Reverend Mallory had left a guardian. And it stood between us and our escape. Our desperate hope for Blackwood was now a desperate fight for our lives.